Joining me now is the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. He is here representing the White House to preview the State of the Union address. Secretary Buttigieg, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good to be with you.
But before I get to the State of the Union, your day job as Secretary of Transportation includes the FAA. You had to ground, the FAA had a ground flights in 3 airports in the Carolinas to assist this national security operation. What more have you learned about this operation, and did we recover everything?
So I'll let others speak to the military and intelligence side, but what I'll say is you saw a great example of the coordination and cooperation between a lot of different players in our government to make sure everything happened safely. The President gave the order on Wednesday that he wanted this thing brought down, but brought down safely. And that's a complicated
that order,
thing.
He gave that order to the military on Wednesday. Shoot it down, however, but under what conditions?
Well, that's just the thing. It sounds simple,
right.
I suppose, if you don't think about it for more than a second. But this thing was above American airspace in terms of where most of the aircraft fly, and we have the most complicated national airspace in the world. This thing is larger. The metal equipment there is larger than a bus. When they did shoot it down, the debris field was about 7 miles. And so the concern, of course, is how do you do it in a way that absolutely minimizes the danger to American lives on the ground and any kind of aviation operations. That's exactly what happened. FAA worked closely with the Pentagon. This thing was brought down in a safe manner, and flights are back to normal in the U.S.
How disruptive was this to air travel throughout the week? Or was it?
Well, certainly something that we were tracking and monitoring. And while this particular situation was obviously unusual, it's not unusual for there to be things, not just the weather that we all know can affect flights, but everything from a space launch to a military operation that can complicate the national airspace. That's why I so appreciate the work that FAA, the Pentagon, and other players do together to keep things moving.
How often are some of these incidents simply classified as UFOs right now because we don't want to talk about the military aspect of it when maybe pilots accidentally run into these things or see these things?
Well, look, I mean, there are obviously things you can talk about and things that you can't. But what we work to make sure of on our side is that anytime there's any situation that requires civilian aircraft to get out of the way, that message gets through and that operations are safe. And there's a phenomenal track record of doing just that.
Are we now in a Cold War posture with China? How else would you describe it if we're not?
Well, I don't know that you can do a one-to-one comparison with the last Cold War, but certainly you see this kind of great power competition, and we're seeing it a lot, you know, while this week the headlines have been dominated by this particular situation. So much of it is playing out in the economic space, and that's part of why we're making the kind of investments that we are. Whether we're talking about infrastructure, noting that you can't lead the world, especially in a highly competitive environment, unless you have world-leading infrastructure. It's one of the things that motivated this administration to work, this president to lead in a bipartisan way, to do the biggest investment in infrastructure since the Eisenhower years. Also on the manufacturing side, the CHIPS and Science Act was another example of a bipartisan accomplishment under President Biden that is really going to give the U.S. an edge in this kind of economic competition with China. And I'm particularly energized and concerned about making sure that we stay ahead when it comes to EVs, getting these supply chains onto American soil, creating American jobs so that it's a made in America electric vehicle revolution.
You know, what's interesting about how the Biden administration has conducted its manufacturing policy and foreign policy with China, how the Trump administration did, and in that sense there hasn't been a lot of disconnect between the two administrations. Is this an admission that the 30 or 40-year Western consensus that said, hey, if we bring China into the economic system, it's going to defang them? It had the exact opposite effect, didn't it?
Well, you know, whether it's Western engagement with China or whether it's Europe's engagement with Russia, there have clearly been a lot of lessons in recent years that engagement alone does not yield comfortable partnership and easy acceptance of a rules-based international order. And each of those struggles obviously is different, but I think some of those patterns do overlap.
Let's go to the President's State of the Union. Look, he's got a lot of things to tout. Why do you think that it has not penetrated the American public?
Well, look, these things don't sell themselves, and it's one of the reasons I'm really looking forward to that State of the Union address. I will say that there have been so many accomplishments under this administration, it can be difficult to list them in a distilled way. Recently, the president hosted a send-off for Ron Klain, the departing chief of staff, and he put it in a way that I thought was especially moving when you think back in historic terms to what it means to inherit one of the toughest situations faced by any president since FDR, pass the most significant legislation on our economy in many ways since FDR, while facing the largest land war in Europe since Truman, achieving the second most important health care bill since LBJ and the most important infrastructure bill since Eisenhower, as Ron put it. And that was just the beginning of the list of accomplishments. But one of the things that we found is that this is happening simultaneously with some of the toughest circumstances ever. We recognize that. And there continue to be a lot of issues that Americans are facing every day, even as we see extraordinary economic news. 500,000 jobs just created in the last month.
Well, that's the thing. None of it seems to accrue to his benefit.
Well, people say that, but then, this president has exceeded expectations again and again politically and functionally in terms of what we're getting done.
Do you think the handling of the classified document situation has contributed to this middling poll situation?
If you go week by week through the polls, you drive yourself crazy. The president and the administration remain focused on getting things done. Think about how rare it is to have unemployment this low and inflation coming down at the same time. That's not something that just happens on its own.
If he had been more transparent about this classified document situation earlier, then he might be in a better place?
Coulda, woulda, shoulda is not the strategic direction or focus of this administration. There's too much on the line. There's too much to do. Remember, while we're very proud of the extraordinary accomplishments, the 12 million jobs, the record-setting job creation, the comeback of the American manufacturing sector, inflation coming down, none of these things are guaranteed to go on, especially when you see some of the saber-rattling going on among House Republicans. If this kind of Maganomics takes hold, and
Maganomics, is that a new phrase you're
Well, I'm trying to
today?
think of some way to explain what they seem to be proposing. These threats around the debt ceiling, proposals to cut Social Security and Medicare, doubling down on preserving tax cuts for billionaires is the kind of central economic vision. If things were to go that way, this economic recovery would not be guaranteed to continue. We've got to keep pushing.
All right. Secretary Buttigieg will be watching the State of the Union with you on Tuesday. Thanks for coming in and sharing your perspective.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.